So what were you doing on December 31st, 1999? Some of you aren't doing nothing because you weren't born yet, right? We were actually at the hospital. My oldest son, Carter, had just been born. And so it was the next day we were celebrating his arrival into our world. But what's so important about December 31st? What's so important about this Friday at the end of the year in 1999? Well, that is when we were expecting the arrival of Y2K. If you don't know what Y2K is, that stands for the year 2000. And Y2K was this prediction, or this set of predictions, that on December 31st, 1999, at the stroke of midnight, when everything went from 1999 to 2000, something in the computers of the world was going to glitch, and it was going to be the end of the world as we know it. There was going to be this catastrophe that was going to happen. So what did happen? Well, there were some glitches. It was reported that one guy rented a John Travolta movie from the video store. He rented it on Friday, took it back on Saturday. That was New Year's Day, and after everything had happened at midnight, he was told that his movie was 100 years overdue and that he owed $91,250 in late fees. Now, I'm telling you, I don't care what that movie was, that kind of news had to give him a little Saturday night fever. You felt it. You knew something was coming. There were a lot of glitches that occurred. There were some things that happened, but the world did not collapse. But how do you prepare for something like that? How do you prepare when there are predictions that are that grand? How do you prepare when it seems like something's going to happen where the odds are going to be against you? We continue our series, Total Comfort, where we are focusing on what it means to experience comfort when trouble or grief or danger come our way. Our message today is called The Comfort of Choosing, and we're going to be looking in Psalm 91. And in Psalm 91, what we're going to discover is the choice that we need to make before the trouble and the grief and the danger arrives. The choice we need to make when it seems like the odds are against us. And what is that choice? Well, let's find out. We begin in Psalm 91, verse 7. The psalmist writes, 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand. In the previous sentence, in verses 5 and 6, the psalmist referenced disease and war. And now what he's doing is he's taking the reference to disease and war, and he's telling us what those things can cause. And whether it's a large-scale outbreak of an infectious disease, or whether it's a large-scale war, it is very possible that 1,000 or 10,000 could fall right next to me and right next to you. That would be a vivid image of what it means to have the odds against you. If thousands of people immediately around you, or 10,000s of people immediately around you are falling by your side, the odds would be against you. And there are moments just like that happening around the world right now. This is not some Old Testament flurry. And what should a follower of God be thinking in these moments when the odds are against us? Look what the psalmist says in the next part of verse 7. But it shall not approach you. 1,000 may fall, 10,000 may fall, but it will not approach you. So, is the psalmist saying if you follow God, you won't get sick? Maybe. Is he saying if you follow God that you won't die in war? Maybe. You may get sick, you may escape sickness. You may die in war. You may avoid death in war. What the psalmist is doing is using the same kind of language we see throughout the Bible. It's, in a sense, almost an either-or type of thing. There is this picture that, yes, this may definitely happen right now, or at the very least, it will ultimately happen. And it's the ultimate language that we need to focus on the most. If sickness, if war approach you, they cannot ultimately approach you. What does that mean? Well, about 2,600 years ago, there were 3 young men. They were living in the area that we know today as modern-day Iraq. And they had a falling out with the king. They were in trouble with the king. The king had created an idol, and he wanted everybody in the kingdom to bow down, physically bow down, and worship this idol. But those 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, all right, well, I'm going to give you guys another chance to bow down. And if you don't, then there's going to be a problem. This is what the king said in Daniel 3, verse 15. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can rescue you from my hands? And how did they respond? Well, they didn't bow down. They still refused to bow down in front of the idol. Their worship was going to be reserved for God and God alone. And so the king kept to his word. He took those 3 young men and he had them sent into a furnace that was so hot that the soldiers that were taking them to put them into the furnace, they were burned up with the edge of the flames. They died just trying to get them into this furnace. But by the supernatural mercy and grace of God, those 3 young men survived the fire. But what if they didn't? What if the fire approached them and they burned up? What if they would have died? Well, this is what they said to the king before they were taken to the furnace. Daniel 3:17. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods, nor worship the golden statue that you have set up. What kind of crazy talk is that? It's the crazy talk of some young men who understood ultimate language. They understood the ultimate truth of God, and they understood that ultimate truth was going to be their ultimate reality. That no matter what happened to them here, the ultimate reality of their life is God was going to rescue them. 650 years later, the Apostle Paul said it this way, Galatians 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Again, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, just like the psalmist, this is ultimate language. Paul's using ultimate language to say, when you look at my life, it is not Paul, it is Christ that you see. My life is ultimately defined by the fact that Jesus Christ has saved me. He has rescued me. And even though I can't explain it with quantum physics, He is living inside of me. The life of Jesus is inside of me. What does that mean? It means that Jesus is alive. It means that He was and is and will always be risen from the dead. And if the life of Jesus Christ is truly living inside of you because you are believing in and trusting in Jesus as your ultimate source of hope and salvation, then the promise that comes with that life is that one day you too will rise from the dead. That eternity with Christ, everlasting joy with Christ will be yours forever. That's the promise. That's why, as the choir sang, the blood will never lose the power of that promise. That's not phony religious hoopla. The historic and practical and supernatural realities surrounding the birth and the life and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus Christ, they are all compelling in truth. It is compelling truth, the story of Jesus. He is risen. He is the Messiah. He is the Savior. He is the Lord. And if He is your Messiah and your Lord and your Savior and your greatest treasure, then the promise that comes is this: when sickness, when war, when trouble, when grief, when danger show up, when they approach you, even if they become the cause of your death, they cannot ultimately approach you, because one day you will rise. You belong to Jesus, and that changes everything. Again, this is not just Christianese here. This is all based on the person and the work of Jesus Christ. And in this post-Christian culture that we live in, it all sounds crazy to the world. Which is why we have to go back to the person of Jesus Christ. It's why we can only argue so much theology and so much denominational philosophy and so much any type of psychology and thought in life. At some point, people are only going to be convinced when they see Jesus. Not us, not what we do, what we say, although all of those things do influence. We don't want to cancel out the gospel by how we live and act. But it is the person and the work of Jesus Christ that people need to see the most. So what do we do with this right now? Okay, great. So the promise of Jesus is that I'm going to rise again just like He did. So what do I do with that right now? Don Straka had just finished his master's degree when he wrote this: God has tailor-made our future resurrection to help overcome last week's tribulation and next week's distress. That's really good. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, designed by God to help us overcome last week's tribulation and next week's distress. He goes on, the promise that I will rise after death radically reshapes my sorrow, how I grieve. Every trial, he says, is another mile marker we pass on our way to our final greater destination. Where are you traveling this summer? Are you going down the interstate? Man, every time you see a mile marker, you can tell yourself, you know what? This is just one more mile marker on my way to a final greater destination. He goes on. Every morning, my alarm clock signals that Jesus has not come back yet. Did you wake up this morning? Did your alarm clock go off? It's a reminder Jesus has not come back yet. And then he says this: every morning means the promised day has not dawned yet, but it is coming. Dear Christian, every single experience in our life is a mile marker toward our final greater destination. No matter how great your vacation is this summer, it is not greater. You can go to the mountains, you can go to the beach, you can go to the lake, you can go to Disney World, and it is not greater than Jesus. There is nothing we will ever experience here that is greater than rising again and being with Christ. It is the greatest destination. And every experience, good and bad, happy and sad, if we could just get it as a mental mile marker, I'm one moment, 1 mile closer to Jesus. Sickness, war, trouble, grief, danger, they may approach us here on this earth, but they cannot ultimately approach us. Why? Because we belong to Jesus. And one day we will rise from the dead and we will see with our own eyes and live in a world where there is no sorrow, there is no shame, there is no sin, and there is no enemy. The psalmist gives us a glimpse of that in verse 8. You will only look on with your eyes and see the retaliation against the wicked. Now, in context, this may more directly refer to this period of time when the people of God were very consistently engaged in military battle. Not just with people who didn't agree with them politically or religiously, but people who were openly defiant against the one true God. Their wickedness was not casual, it was clear. But since we are not a people who are constantly, daily engaged and consistently engaged in battle, in military battle as the people of God were back then, what does this do for us? How does this strike with us today? Well, as believers, we have the opportunity, we always have the opportunity to see that God is at work. We always have the opportunity to see that no matter what is happening around us, that God is at work. The Apostle Paul famously put it this way in Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good. Good for whom? Next part. To those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Once again, ultimate language here. Ultimate language that will, and really is even now, a reality. Ultimate language that leads to ultimate reality. And what is that ultimate reality? Good. The ultimate reality is good. Not good for 2 years or 4 years or a decade or 80 years or a century. But good 10,000 years from now and beyond. The ultimate reality is the goodness of God, the good of God, and we live in it no fail. We never get out of the goodness of God. And that matters right now, today. Charles Spurgeon put it this way. I'm just going to tell you, everything I'm about to read is some of the craziest stuff you've ever heard in your life, okay? Just giving you that heads up. It is impossible that any ill should happen to the man or woman who is beloved of the Lord. The most crushing calamities can only shorten his journey and hasten him to his reward. The worst calamity in the life of a Christian is the next mile marker toward reward. He goes on. Ill to him is no ill, but only good in a mysterious form. Here's where it gets psycho. Losses enrich him. Sickness is his medicine. Reproach is his honor. Death is his gain. No evil, in the strict sense of the word, can happen to him, for everything is overruled for good. All right, let me just confess for all of us. We don't think that way, okay? Maybe sometimes on Easter Sunday for 30 seconds, maybe. But in the nitty-gritty of our life, we don't tend to think that way. but we should. Why? Because one day we will rise. So we should be seeing and believing and feeling that everything is overruled for good. But how can we do that? Well, it comes down to a choice. It comes down to a choice we make before the sickness and the war and the trouble and the grief and the danger show up. And what is that choice? He tells us, verse 9, "For you have made the Lord, my refuge, the Most High, your dwelling place." I like him saying my refuge. This is not some cute preacher put on a coat and tie or some skinny jeans and got up and said, "All right, let me cheer y'all on." No, this is a guy who experienced what it means to have everything fall apart. He knew calamity. He said, "God's my refuge, and you have made him your refuge too." We must choose to make the one true, most high, almighty God our refuge and our dwelling place. That's the choice we make before all this stuff happens. Or maybe put another way, we choose to make God our home. What does that mean? Well, it means that we choose God first and most. It means when we hear about the interest rates, or we hear about the missile launches, or we hear about the weather watches or the test results or the grocery prices or the conflict at work or the conflict in marriage or the latest celebrity gossip or the latest gossip about someone in our neighborhood. What we do in that moment is we choose to be first and most at home with God. We choose to trust God first and most and to make him our primary thought. As the hymn says, our best thought by day or by night. And again, let's be honest, we don't tend to do that, all right? We don't. We hear the gossip and we're thinking, who am I going to text this to right now? Who am I going to call and tell about this? We hear about the interest rates and we start freaking out. Do I need to refinance? Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? We hear about things in life and we don't tend to say, hey, mile marker. We don't tend to say, hey, sickness is medicine. We don't tend to think, wait a minute, everything is overruled for good. What we tend to do is we tend to get angry or afraid. We tend to get anxious or stressed, or we just get apathetic. We don't care. We just keep doing the same thing. No big deal. But there is another choice we can make. We can make the choice to see different, to believe different, and to feel different. But here's the real question. Do we want to? I mean, that's the question for all of us, right? Do we really want to? I've told y'all this story before. It always sticks in my head so many times. There was an older lady at the first church I pastored, and one day she was just saying something terrible about someone else in the church. And there was another lady from our church, and she said, do you really want to say those things? And she said, look, I'm an old woman. I can say whatever I want. And the other lady said, yeah, but do you really want to? So do you really want to make this choice? Do we want to choose God? Choose his goodness, choose his providence, choose his sovereignty, choose his grace, choose his love, choose his mercy? Or if we're really honest, do we not want to choose him to be a refuge? Do we not want to choose him to be our home? Would we rather just choose to rave and rant and gossip and be angry or afraid or apathetic or anxious or anything else? Do we really in life, would we rather just do the other? I mean, give yourself a quiz. Let's just look back over the last 7 days. Over the last 7 days, do you think you have found yourself choosing to make God your home, or have you chose something else? I'll be honest, it's been a rough week for me. I have been way too prone to be overwhelmed with other things and not choose to make God my home. That's why 6 weeks ago, when I first started outlining this sermon series, the title of this week's sermon was The Comfort of Refuge. And then by Monday, maybe Tuesday, the title had changed to The Comfort of Seeing. And then by Thursday, it changed to The Comfort of Choosing, partly because of my own struggles in making this choice that we have to make God our refuge. Look, we aren't talking about being perfect Christians because we can't pull that off. We're talking about being practicing Christians. Or as I heard this week in our church staff meeting, which is fantastic, practice makes progress. Doesn't make perfect, but it makes progress. So are you in the practice of choosing God? Are you in the practice of choosing to make God your home? And again, don't get confused with that word home. We're not talking about getting a sleeping bag and coming and sleeping in the sanctuary every night so you can be closer to God, okay? We're talking about your heart, your mind, your spirit, your soul, your attitude, your emotions, your decisions, all of that. Choosing to trust God first and most, choosing to make your primary home with God. But again, we really struggle sometimes to make that choice, don't we? That reality reminds me of a story I've shared before about Grace Rankin. 8 years ago, one of Grace's closest friends died in a car accident, and it hit her really hard. She prayed and she prayed and she prayed. She was struggling so much, but she felt like God was just absent and silent. Ever felt that way? Ever prayed about something and you think, man, God's not answering me. God's just, he's left me. He's silent. Well, she didn't know what to do, so she went to her dad for advice, and this is what her dad told her. We only have two options. We can choose to run toward God or away from him. Running toward him is scary sometimes. He's massive and powerful. But running away from him is even more frightening. Why? Why is it more frightening to run away from God? Here's why. Don't miss this. The only way everything and anything gets overruled with good is through God. And through God and God alone. We will try all the other things. But ultimately, the only way that everything can be overruled for good, the only way that your dear friend dying in a car accident can be overruled with good is if you have God. Otherwise, it's never overruled with good. There's never hope. There's never peace. There's never confidence. There's never comfort. Now, Grace didn't have some big magical experience because her daddy gave her great advice. But she did listen to his advice. And she started putting it into practice. She started making the choice to run to God and not run away from him. And over time, something happened. This is how she described it. Gently, his peace came to guard my heart and mind. It stole in undetectably at first, like the earliest light of sunrise, but it came to comfort me, just as he promised. She found comfort when everything was falling apart, when all of the odds of her emotions were stacked against her. She found comfort. How? She goes on. We are promised a happy ending. Union with Christ. That is the happy ending, okay? The happy ending is not a perfect marriage and perfect kids and a perfect church and a perfect country and a perfect retirement and perfect health. None of that has ever been promised. If anyone tells you that, it's a lie. The promise is a happy ending, meaning we get to be with Jesus. That's the promise. And that what happens here won't last forever. That's two parts of a great promise there. We get to be with Jesus, and whatever happens here will not last forever. That's really hard for us to believe. I get it. It's hard for me to believe. It's hard for us as humans to get our mind around that. But whatever happens here will not last forever. But union with Christ will last forever. I saw a headline today from the Iranian government official that said there are everlasting consequences. And that word just struck me in that title, because the only everlasting consequences are connected to God and God alone. Nothing that happens here will last forever except rejecting God. And then Grace said this: Christ is coming. We must only keep running to him, waiting in trust and peace. Whatever happens here won't last forever. Christ is coming. That is total comfort.